Okay, we're starting chapter 20 in Biology 2E, and we're talking a bit about grouping of organisms. How do we classify them? How and why do we group them? And what does that tell us? And so we're going to try and talk about systematics and phylogeny, and talk about how we make a cladogram or a phylogeny, which allows us to see evolutionary history. So, um, this is something that Darwin started once he started thinking about evolution, and all organisms share many, many characteristics. They're composed of cells. They have membranes. They share lots of metabolic processes like ATP, glycolysis, electron transport, things like that. They all have DNA and RNA, and they all use that to make their proteins. And so Darwin started believing that we could reconstruct like a family tree of organisms. And these evolutionary relationships, the doing this study of these relationships is systematics, and a phylogeny is a family tree. It's a hypothesis about how species are related. And we construct these by looking at shared characteristics, shared features of anatomy, of any part of their biology, and particularly now looking at uh, their chemicals, their DNA sequence data. Um, and these allow us to construct these phylogenies or cladograms, and trying to identify common ancestors and to see who is more closely related to who. Um, and so we use similarities, but we have to be careful because not all similarities are the same. Um, some similarities are occur because of shared ancestors, shared common ancestors, but not all. Um, some similarities are prior, and some are kind of seeming similarities, but are actually due to convergence. So we want characteristics that are derived or um, that are new versus ancestral, and we're willing to look at things like anatomy or morphology, behavior, physiology, DNA, and hopefully these can be easily recognized, um, that that either they're present or absent. But sometimes it's hard to tell. Um, in good examples of these, like in mammals, all mammals share hair. Uh, Anything that's not a mammal doesn't have hair. Mammals do share lungs, but that's an ancestral feature. It's not derived because you also see lungs in amphibians, reptiles, birds, and even some fish. So, um, so that only mammals have hair, and so that suggests it's a derived character, and that it's unique to that group. And so when we look at characteristics, we try and link them, and we often look at multiple characteristics. So we kind of look at presence and absence, and we may look at lots of different things. And when we have this, we construct the phylogeny. And so here, um, lampreys are the outgroup here. Doesn't have any of the derived characters, and then we arrange them so that they are as simple as possible, so that we don't have to make some strange assumptions. Um, so this is a cladogram, and the clades are groups that share their own derived characters. So amniotes are a clade, and mammals are a clade within amniotes. Um, and so that this makes sense. But there are other possible arrangements. We could have possible arrangements where they lost. We could say, well, maybe frogs are really, they share a feature with gorillas and humans in that they none of them have a tail. But since frogs don't have hair, we'd either have to think that maybe they lost that feature, and maybe they lost the other feature of amniotic membranes. Um, and so this one on the side requires these extra assumptions, and so we try and avoid those. So we classify organisms, and I'll talk about the taxonomic hierarchy later and the different types of taxa. But our goal is to find monophyletic groups, the most recent common ancestor and all the descendants. That's a clade. We want to avoid groups that are paraphyletic or polyphyletic, which means they may not include all the descendants of a common ancestor, or they may the group may not uh, include the most recent common ancestor. Um, and so when we get these monophyletic phylogenies, these we try and base our taxonomic hierarchies, and I wanted to reflect these relationships. And so I'm going to go through an example that's where the phylogeny is different than our common sense, um, kind of how we interpret the organization of animals. So so right now we have we have a bunch of different groups here, uh, and these include uh, lots of reptiles, and in this polyphyletic group, we have two versions of flying reptiles, bats and hawks, and uh, we put them in this group, but we don't have all the most recent common ancestor, and there's some unusual things going on there. So we might this is a polyphyletic group since there's no most recent common ancestors. Um, Here's a paraphyletic group that shows uh, organisms and uh, the dinosaurs are classified here as a group, but they're paraphyletic because hawks also share lots of features with dinosaurs and obviously share a common ancestors, but aren't included in the group. Uh, and so if we go back, flying vertebrates doesn't make a good group because there's lots of organisms that are more closely related to both bats and hawks that aren't in that group. Dinosaurs, while all sharing several characteristics, also have characteristics with other organisms that aren't in that group and they share a common ancestor. So, a monophyletic group would be the archosaurs, which includes all the dinosaurs, but it also includes some living organisms like crocodiles and hawks. And they all share a bunch of features like hollow bones, four chambered heart, high metabolism, parental care. Okay, and there are no other organisms in this group that aren't included within this clade. And so it shows us a nice evolutionary relationship, and this would be an ideal way to classify organisms.